Blood spattered across the dirt as August Edwards stumbled backward, his hand pressed against his jaw where the fist had connected. The crowd gathered outside Buffalo's only saloon jeered, their faces twisted with drunken delight at the sight of the newcomer getting what they believed he deserved. "Stay down, Edwards," shouted one of the men. Worthless drifter, August slowly pushed himself to his feet, his weathered boots finding purchase in the Wyoming dust. The year was 1876, and like many men who found themselves in Buffalo, Wyoming, he carried the weight of a past he preferred not to discuss. His steel blue eyes scanned the crowd, not with hatred but with a quiet, stubborn resolve that had kept him alive through worse situations than this. The man who had struck him, Butch Harlow, the local cattle baron's son, circled him like a predator. "My father was right about you. No man who can't even hold onto a homestead deserves respect in these parts." August wiped blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. He'd only been in Buffalo for 3 weeks, taking odd jobs and keeping to himself. Somehow, that had been enough to earn Harlow's contempt. "I ain't looking for trouble," August said, his voice steady despite the pain radiating through his jaw. "Should have thought of that before you took that ranch hand job from Morrison," Butch sneered. "My father offered you work. You refused." The truth was simpler. Samuel Harlow's reputation for cruelty toward his workers was well known, and August had learned long ago to trust his instincts about men like that. As Butch lunged forward for another swing, a woman's voice cut through the commotion. "That's enough." The crowd parted as Delilah Patterson pushed her way through. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her emerald eyes flashed with indignation. She wore a simple blue dress, practical for the schoolteacher she was, but there was nothing simple about the way she positioned herself between August and his attacker. "Miss Patterson, this isn't your concern," Butch said, his tone softening marginally out of respect for her position in town. "When you're beating a man 5 against 1 in front of my schoolhouse, it becomes my concern," she replied, gesturing to the wooden building across the street where several young faces pressed against the windows. "These children don't need to see such barbarism." Butch's face reddened. "This man has done nothing wrong that I can see," Delilah finished for him. "Now clear out before I send for Sheriff Taylor." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Butch spat on the ground near August's feet and turned away. "Come on, boys. Miss Patterson wants to defend this lost cause." As the crowd dispersed, Delilah turned to August. Up close, he could see the freckles scattered across her nose and the intelligence in her eyes. She handed him a handkerchief. "For your lip," she said. "Obliged, madam," August replied, pressing it to his bleeding mouth. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." "Perhaps not," she agreed, "but I've never been one to stand by when someone needs help." She studied his face. "You're new in Buffalo, 3 weeks," he confirmed. "August Edwards." "Delilah Patterson." She nodded toward the schoolhouse. "I should get back to my students. You might want to see Doc Wilson about that cut." As she turned to leave, August called after her, "Why'd you help me, Miss Patterson? You don't know me from Adam." Delilah paused, looking back over her shoulder. "I know enough to see a good man being wrongfully judged." Her expression softened slightly. "They seem eager to cast you as worthless, Mr. Edwards. I prefer to make up my own mind." With that, she walked back to the schoolhouse, leaving August standing in the street with her handkerchief pressed to his bleeding lip, and a strange feeling in his chest that had nothing to do with the fight. The following day, August rode out to the Morrison ranch where he'd been hired as a hand. The property sat about 5 miles outside Buffalo, a modest spread compared to the Harlow land that surrounded it on 3 sides. Jim Morrison had built it up from nothing over 20 years, and now at 65, his health was failing. His son, Matthew, had been helping run the place until typhoid took him 6 months earlier. August dismounted in front of the main house, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days. As he tied his horse, a small figure darted from the barn, moving with the speed and energy only a child could muster. "Are you the new man?" the boy called out, skidding to a halt in front of August. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with sandy hair and curious eyes. A wooden toy pistol was tucked into his belt. "That I am," August replied. August Edwards. I'm Daniel Morrison, the boy announced proudly. My grandpa hired you. He looked August up and down with a critical eye. You don't look like much of a cowboy. Despite himself, August smiled. Is that right? Your boots are too clean, Daniel explained seriously. And your hat ain't got enough dirt. Daniel, Jim Morrison called from the porch, leaning heavily on his cane. Stop pestering Mr. Edwards and get back to your chores. The boy scampered off and August approached the older man. Jim Morrison's face was deeply lined, his frame gaunt from illness, but his handshake was still firm. Sorry about that, Morrison said. Boy's been without his father for half a year now, gets excited about every new face. No apologies needed, August assured him. Seems like a good kid. Morrison nodded, pride evident in his weathered face. That he is, only thing my son left behind worth having. He gestured toward the barn. Thomas will show you what needs doing. We're short-handed with the spring calving. August nodded and headed toward the barn, aware of Daniel watching him from behind a water trough. The boy clearly needed a father figure, but August wasn't sure he was the right man for that job. His own past had taught him the danger of getting too attached. 3 days later, August was mending fence on the northern property line when he spotted a buggy approaching. As it drew closer, he recognized Delilah Patterson at the reins. She pulled to a stop nearby and gathered a stack of books before climbing down. Miss Patterson, August said, removing his hat. Bit far from town, aren't you? I come twice a week to tutor Daniel, she explained. Jim wants to make sure the boy gets his education even if he can't make it to town for school regularly. August nodded. That's mighty considerate of you. It's my job, she replied, but her smile suggested it was more than duty that brought her out to the ranch. Before August could respond, Daniel came running over the rise, face brightening when he saw Delilah. Miss Patterson, did you bring the book about pirates? I did, she laughed, handing him one from her stack. But arithmetic comes first. Daniel groaned but took her hand as they walked toward the house. August found himself watching them go, struck by the natural way Delilah interacted with the boy, patient but firm. As May turned to June, August settled into life at the Morrison Ranch. The work was hard mending fences, branding calves, breaking horses, but satisfying. He found himself growing attached to Daniel, who followed him around whenever chores and lessons allowed, peppering him with questions about horses, guns, and life beyond Buffalo. One evening, as August sat on the porch repairing a bridle, Delilah joined him after finishing Daniel's lesson. The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He's doing well with his reading, she said, settling into the chair beside August. He's a bright boy, August nodded. Morrison's proud of him, as he should be. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, Where were you before Buffalo, Mr. Edwards? All over, he answered vaguely. Texas, Colorado, Montana for a spell, always moving, seems that way. Delilah studied him. What brings a man to Wyoming who can't seem to stay put anywhere else? August's hands stilled on the bridle. Sometimes a man just needs a fresh start. And have you found it here? Her question hung in the air between them. Before August could answer, Jim Morrison called from inside, asking for help getting to bed. August excused himself, oddly relieved to escape Delilah's perceptive gaze. Later that night, August lay awake in the small room above the barn that had become his home. Delilah's question echoed in his mind. Had he found a fresh start in Buffalo? The truth was more complicated than he cared to admit, even to himself. 3 years earlier, August had owned a small ranch in Colorado. He'd built it with his own hands, determined to create something lasting after years of drifting. Then came the drought, followed by cattle thieves, and finally, the fire that took everything, including his wife, Sarah, and their infant son. He'd spiraled after that, taking work where he could find it, drinking too much, fighting too often. It wasn't until he'd hit rock bottom in a Cheyenne jail cell that August had decided to pull himself together. Buffalo was supposed to be just another stop, but something about the Morrison Ranch, about Daniel's eager smile and Jim's quiet dignity, made him wonder if maybe he could stay. And then there was Delilah Patterson, with her direct gaze and challenging questions. August couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, but he'd buried his heart alongside his family. Some losses weren't meant to be recovered from. July brought sweltering heat and trouble from the Harlows. Samuel Harlow had been pressuring Morrison to sell his land for years, and now, with Jim's health failing, he was becoming more aggressive. August and the other hands found cut fences and scattered cattle with increasing frequency. One afternoon, August was riding the eastern boundary when he came across 3 of Harlow's men driving Morrison cattle toward Harlow land. Drawing his rifle from its scabbard, August positioned himself in their path. "That's Morrison's stock you're pushing," he called out. "Best turn them around." The leader, a man August recognized as Harlow's foreman, sneered. "Old Morrison's done for. Might as well get used to these being Harlow cattle." "Not yet, they ain't," August replied evenly. "Turn them back." For a tense moment, August thought they might challenge him 3 against 1. Then the foreman spat and signaled to the others. They turned the cattle back toward Morrison land, but as they rode past, the foreman leaned down. "Harlow says to remind Morrison about his offer. Price goes down every time he refuses." August watched them ride away, unease settling in his gut. That evening, he reported the incident to Jim, who listened with a grim expression. "Been going on for years," Jim said, pouring himself a small whiskey despite the doctor's orders. "Harlow wants to control the water rights on this side of the county. My land's the last piece he doesn't own." "Why not sell?" August asked. "Take Daniel somewhere else, start fresh." Jim's eyes hardened. "This land is Daniel's inheritance. His father helped build this place. His mother is buried on that hill yonder." He shook his head. "I won't let Harlow take what belongs to my grandson." August understood stubborn pride and family legacy, but he also knew the dangers of standing against men like Harlow. "What happens to Daniel if something happens to you?" The older man was quiet for a long moment. "I've made arrangements. His aunt in Denver would take him, but—" He trailed off, looking out the window to where Daniel was playing with the ranch dog. "This is his home." In town the following Saturday, August sought out Sheriff Taylor to report the cattle incident. The sheriff, a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, listened but offered little encouragement. "I'll have a word with Harlow," he promised. "But unless you caught them actually stealing cattle, there's not much I can do." Frustrated, August left the sheriff's office and headed toward the general store. As he was selecting supplies, Delilah entered, surprise registering on her face when she saw him. "Mr. Edwards, town suits you better when you're not bleeding in it," he smiled despite himself. "Miss Patterson." "Shopping day. Yes, though I seem to have forgotten my list." She approached, glancing at his selections. "You might consider adding soap to that pile." August raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I need a bath, madam?" "I wouldn't presume to suggest anything so personal," she replied, eyes twinkling. "Though Daniel mentioned yesterday that you smell like the wrong end of a horse." August laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "Can't argue with that assessment." They completed their shopping together, and August offered to walk Delilah back to the schoolhouse. As they strolled down Buffalo's Main Street, their conversation flowed more easily than he expected. "How did you come to be teaching in Wyoming?" he asked. "You don't sound like you're from these parts." "I'm not," she confirmed. "I grew up in Boston. My father was a professor at Harvard." August whistled. "Long way from Boston to Buffalo." "I wanted adventure," she said simply, "and independence. Teaching positions for unmarried women are limited in the East, but out here." She gestured around them. "A woman can make her own way if she's willing to work for it." "Brave decision," August remarked, "or foolish depending on who you ask," Delilah replied with a wry smile. "My parents certainly thought so." When they reached the schoolhouse, August hesitated, reluctant to end their conversation. "Daniel speaks highly of you," he said finally, "says you're teaching him about places he's never seen." "Books can take us anywhere," Delilah said. "Even a boy on a Wyoming ranch can sail the South Seas or explore ancient Rome." "Wish I'd had a teacher like you growing up," August admitted. Delilah studied him. "It's never too late to learn, Mr. Edwards." There was something in her gaze that made August uncomfortable, not because it was unwelcome, but because it stirred feelings he thought he'd buried for good. "I should get back," he said, tipping his hat. "Good day, Miss Patterson." As August rode back to the ranch, he couldn't shake thoughts of Delilah. There was something refreshing about her directness, her refusal to be intimidated by the rougher aspects of frontier life. She saw things clearly, perhaps too clearly for August's comfort. Upon returning to the Morrison ranch, August found Jim sitting alone on the porch, looking more tired than usual. The old man motioned for August to join him. "Got a letter today," Jim said, handing August a crumpled paper. "From Denver. Daniel's aunt can't take him anymore, remarried to a man who doesn't want another man's child." His voice was bitter. "Said she'd find him a home with a good family if necessary." August read the letter, anger rising at the casual way this woman dismissed her own nephew. "What will you do?" "What can I do?" Jim sighed. "I'm dying, Edwards. Doctor says maybe 6 months if I'm lucky." He gazed out at the land he'd worked for decades. "I need to make arrangements for Daniel, for the ranch." August shifted uncomfortably. "Surely there's someone in town. I want you to consider staying on," Jim interrupted. "Not just as a hand, as foreman. Run the place for Daniel until he's old enough." The request hit August like a physical blow. "Mr. Morrison, you don't have to answer now," Jim said. "Just think about it. You've got away with the boy, he trusts you. And I've seen how you handle the ranch, the men. You know what you're doing." August stood, overwhelmed by the responsibility Jim was offering, asking of him. "I'll think on it," he promised, though every instinct told him to saddle his horse and ride away before dawn. That night, August dreamed of the fire that had taken his family. In the dream, as always, he was too late to save them. But this time, when he pulled open the burning door, it wasn't Sarah and their son he saw, but Delilah and Daniel, reaching for him through the flames. He woke sweating, the first light of dawn seeping through the barn window. With shaking hands, he poured water from the pitcher by his bed and splashed his face. The dream had left him rattled in a way he hadn't been for months. Attachment meant vulnerability. August had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Taking on responsibility for Daniel, for the Morrison ranch, it went against every wall he'd built around himself since Colorado. And yet, as August dressed and headed out to begin the day's work, he couldn't deny the connection he already felt to this place, to the boy who followed him like a shadow, to the old man fighting to preserve his grandson's inheritance. When Delilah arrived that afternoon for Daniel's lesson, August was breaking a new horse in the corral. She stopped to watch, Daniel beside her, as August worked patiently with the spirited bay gelding. By the time the horse accepted the saddle and August's weight, Daniel was cheering and even Delilah looked impressed. "Quite a skill you have there, Mr. Edwards," she said as August dismounted and led the horse to the rail where they stood. "Just patience," August replied, removing his gloves. "Horse needs to know you won't give up on him, even when he's being difficult." "Sounds like some of my students," Delilah smiled, then turned to Daniel. "Speaking of which, we should get started on today's lessons." As they turned toward the house, Daniel looked back at August. "Can Mr. Edwards sit in on my lesson today? I want to show him how good I am at multiplication." Delilah glanced at August, eyebrows raised in question. To his own surprise, August nodded. "I could use a reminder of my times tables," he said. The lesson took place at the kitchen table, with Daniel proudly demonstrating his arithmetic skills while August watched. Afterward, Delilah had the boy read aloud from a book about ancient Egypt, his small finger tracing the words as he sounded them out. "Excellent, Daniel," Delilah praised when he finished the chapter. "Now, I've brought something special today." She pulled a detailed map from her bag and spread it on the table. "This is a map of the United States. Can you find Wyoming?" Daniel eagerly pointed to their territory on the map, then found Colorado, Montana, and eventually Boston when Delilah challenged him to locate her hometown. "Where are you from, Mr. Edwards?" Daniel asked, looking up at August expectantly. "Originally, Missouri," August answered. "Little town you won't find on that map. And where have you lived since then?" Delilah prompted gently. August hesitated, then leaned forward and began pointing to various locations on the map. "Texas for cattle driving, New Mexico Territory during the war, Colorado for a spell. Montana, Idaho, back to Colorado again. Then Wyoming. You've seen more of the country than most people will in a lifetime," Delilah remarked. Just never found a reason to stay put, August said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. After Daniel's lesson concluded, the boy went outside to complete his chores, leaving August and Delilah alone in the kitchen. She was gathering her books when she paused, turning to August with an unreadable expression. "He admires you greatly, you know," she said. "He told me last week he wants to be just like Mr. Edwards when he grows up." August frowned. "Boy needs better ambitions than that." "Perhaps," Delilah acknowledged, "but it's not your wandering he admires, it's your strength, your kindness." She closed her book bag deliberately. "Children see more clearly than we give them credit for. Miss Patterson," August began, but she continued. "Jim Morrison told me about his proposition, about his concerns for Daniel's future." August's jaw tightened. "That's between him and me, is it?" Delilah challenged. "Because it seems to me it's about Daniel most of all, and that boy has already lost too much for someone so young." "I never asked to be responsible for anyone's child," August said, his voice harsher than he intended. Delilah didn't flinch. "Few of us ask for the responsibilities that find us, Mr. Edwards. We simply decide whether we're brave enough to accept them." Before August could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Through the kitchen window, they saw Samuel Harlow and 4 of his men riding into the yard. Jim Morrison was already on the porch, leaning heavily on his cane. "Stay here," August told Delilah, heading for the door. Outside, tension crackled in the air as August took his place beside Jim. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, which was a small mercy. Samuel Harlow was a large man with cold eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. He remained mounted as he addressed Morrison. "Jim, I see you're still being stubborn about my offer." "Nothing's changed, Harlow," Jim replied steadily. "This land isn't for sale." Harlow's gaze shifted to August. "You must be the drifter my son mentioned. Edwards, was it? Interesting choice for a ranch hand, Jim." "Mr. Edwards works for me," Jim said firmly. "That's all you need to know." "What I know," Harlow said, his tone hardening, "is that water's getting scarce and your ranch sits on the best spring in the county. I'm offering fair market value plus 20%, and I'm declining," Jim responded. "Same as last time and the time before that." Harlow's face darkened. "You're a dying man, Jim. Everyone knows it. What happens to this place, to that grandson of yours when you're gone? You think this drifter will stick around?" He nodded toward August. "Men like him don't put down roots, they run when things get difficult." August felt the words like a physical blow, not because they came from Harlow, but because they echoed his own doubts. "My arrangements are my business," Jim said. "Now, unless you've got something new to say, I'd appreciate you getting off my land." For a moment, Harlow looked like he might argue further. Then he nodded to his men. "Think about my offer, Jim. Price is good until the end of the month after that." He let the threat hang unfinished in the air before turning his horse and riding away, his men following. Once they were gone, Jim sagged visibly, and August helped him back to his chair on the porch. "He's getting bolder," Jim muttered. "Won't be long before talking turns to something worse." "You need to consider his offer," August said quietly, "for Daniel's sake." Jim's eyes flashed with anger. "You sound like you're siding with Harlow." "I'm siding with keeping that boy safe," August replied. "Harlow's right about one thing: what happens to Daniel if something happens to you." From the doorway, Delilah cleared her throat. "Perhaps this discussion would be better continued when Daniel isn't likely to overhear." She nodded toward the barn, where the boy had emerged and was watching them with wide, concerned eyes. Jim sighed and waved his grandson over. "Everything's fine, Daniel, just grown-up talk." To August and Delilah, he said, "We'll discuss this later." That evening, after Daniel was in bed, Jim invited August and Delilah, who had stayed for supper, to join him in the study. The room was small but comfortable, lined with bookshelves that reflected Jim's unexpected love of literature. "I appreciate your concerns," Jim began, settling into a worn leather chair. "Both of you, but I've made my decision about the ranch. It stays in the family." "Even if that puts Daniel at risk," August challenged. "Selling to Harlow would put more than Daniel at risk," Jim countered. "That man would control every drop of water in the county. The smaller ranchers, the townspeople, they'd all be at his mercy." Delilah, who had been quiet, spoke up. Have you considered other options? Another buyer, perhaps? Jim shook his head. Tried that last year. Anyone interested gets warned off by Harlow. Man's got influence with the banks, the territory officials. He looked at August. That's why I'm asking you to stay, to protect what's Daniel's until he's old enough to decide for himself. August paced the small room. I'm one man, Jim. Against Harlow and his crew, those aren't odds I'd bet on. You wouldn't be alone, Delilah interjected. The people of Buffalo may fear Harlow, but they don't love him, if they knew what was at stake. You're suggesting what? A town against a cattle baron? August shook his head. That's not how things work out here. Perhaps it should be, Delilah replied, her voice firm. This territory is becoming a state soon. Laws matter. Property rights matter. Laws only matter when there's someone willing to enforce them, August said bitterly. And Sheriff Taylor isn't that man. Jim leaned forward in his chair. So what do you suggest, Edwards? That I hand over everything my son died for, that I leave Daniel with nothing but money that'll be gone before he's grown? The question hung in the air between them. August had no answer that wouldn't sound like cowardice, but the memories of his own losses made the thought of fighting another losing battle unbearable. I need time to think, August finally said. Jim nodded slowly. Fair enough, but don't take too long. Harlow won't. After the meeting broke up, August walked Delilah to her buggy. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamond dust. Neither spoke until they reached the vehicle. You think I'm a coward, August said finally, for suggesting Jim sell. Delilah turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. I think you're a man who's known loss and fears knowing it again. She paused. Jim told me about your family in Colorado. August stiffened. He had no right. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But it helps me understand why the thought of fighting for this place for Daniel frightens you so much. I'm not afraid, August insisted, though they both knew it for a lie. We're all afraid, Mr. Edwards, Delilah said softly. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. She climbed into her buggy and gathered the reins. Daniel deserves someone willing to fight for him. I believe you could be that person if you'd only let yourself. As she drove away, August remained standing in the yard, her words echoing in his mind. The truth was, he had been running for 3 years not just from place to place, but from the possibility of caring too deeply, of having something to lose again. The next morning, August rose before dawn and saddled his horse. He rode the boundaries of the Morrison property slowly, taking in the rolling grasslands, the clear creek that cut through the eastern section, the stand of cottonwoods where Jim's son and daughter-in-law were buried. It was good land worth fighting for, if a man believed in such things. August wasn't sure he did anymore, but as the sun rose over the Wyoming plains, he found himself wondering what it might be like to stay, to build something lasting again. His thoughts were interrupted by the sight of smoke rising from beyond the northern boundary. August spurred his horse toward it, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. As he crested a hill, his worst fears were confirmed. The line cabin, where one of Morrison's hands stayed during calving season, was ablaze. August galloped toward the burning structure, praying no one was inside. As he approached, 3 riders emerged from behind the cabin. Even at a distance, August recognized Harlow's foreman and 2 of his men. They spotted him and immediately spurred their horses away. August's first instinct was to pursue them, but the possibility that someone might be in the burning cabin took precedence. He dismounted and approached as close as the heat would allow, calling out repeatedly. There was no response, and after circling the structure, August was reasonably certain it was empty. Unable to save the cabin, he remounted and raced back to the main house. Jim and Daniel were at breakfast when August burst in, still smelling of smoke. Harlow's men burned the North Line cabin, he reported grimly. Saw them riding away from it. Jim's face hardened. Anyone hurt? No, cabin was empty. August poured himself coffee with a hand that wasn't quite steady. This is just the beginning, Jim. What do you mean? Daniel asked, his young face confused and frightened. Why would Mr. Harlow burn our cabin? Jim and August exchanged looks, and Jim sighed. Sometimes men do bad things to get what they want, Daniel. Mr. Harlow wants our land. But it's our land, Daniel protested. He can't just take it. No, he can't, Jim agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. That's why we need to be strong and smart. He looked at August. Ride into town, report this to Sheriff Taylor. Take Daniel with you, he can spend the day with Miss Patterson at the school. August nodded, understanding Jim's unstated concern for Daniel's safety. We'll leave right away. The ride to Buffalo was tense. With Daniel asking questions, August struggled to answer honestly without frightening the boy further. When they reached the schoolhouse, classes were already in session, but Delilah immediately sensed something was wrong. Children, please read Chapter 3 silently while I speak with Mr. Edwards, she instructed, leading August and Daniel into the small cloakroom. August quickly explained about the burned cabin. Delilah's expression grew grave as she listened. Of course Daniel can stay here today, she said. But August, this is serious, if Harlow's men are willing to destroy property. I know, August said grimly. I'm going to see the sheriff now, but I don't expect much. Delilah surprised him by placing a hand on his arm. Be careful, Harlow has friends in town. Her touch and concern stirred something in August that he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. I will, he promised, then turned to Daniel. You mind Miss Patterson today, you hear? I'll be back this afternoon to take you home. Daniel nodded solemnly. Are you going to catch the bad men who burned our cabin? August knelt to the boy's level. I'm going to try, but the most important thing is keeping you and your grandpa safe. After leaving Daniel in Delilah's capable hands, August headed to the sheriff's office. As expected, Taylor was reluctant to take action. Did you actually see them start the fire? The sheriff asked, not looking up from the papers on his desk. I saw them riding away from it, fresh lit, August replied, frustration mounting. Same men who have been causing trouble on Morrison land for months. Taylor sighed. Look, Edwards, I understand you're upset, but accusing Samuel Harlow's men of arson is serious business. I need more than your word before I start making arrests. By the time you get more evidence, it might be too late for Jim Morrison and his grandson, August said darkly. This finally got the sheriff's attention. Are you suggesting Harlow would harm a child? I'm suggesting desperate men do desperate things, August replied. And Harlow seems mighty desperate to get that land. Taylor stood, adjusting his gun belt. I'll ride out to the Harlow ranch, have a word with Samuel. That's all I can do for now. It wasn't enough, but August recognized it was all he would get. As he left the sheriff's office, he spotted Butch Harlow and several companions exiting the saloon across the street. Butch noticed him at the same moment, and a slow, malicious smile spread across his face. Well, if it isn't Morrison's lapdog, Butch called out, loudly enough for passers-by to hear. How's that north cabin looking these days? The taunt confirmed what August already knew: the Harlows were behind the fire. But confronting Butch in the middle of Buffalo's Main Street would only lead to more trouble. Stay out of Morrison business, Harlow, August warned, continuing toward his horse. Butch followed, his companions trailing behind. Heard old Jim's getting worse. Shame what'll happen to that boy when he goes. August turned slowly. Nothing's going to happen to Daniel, not while I'm around, Butch laughed. And how long will that be, Drifter? Everyone knows you're kind here today, gone tomorrow. Just like you ran from Colorado after you couldn't protect your own family. The words hit August like a physical blow. How did Butch know about Colorado? The answer was obvious. Samuel Harlow had connections, had probably investigated August's past when he started working for Morrison. You don't know what you're talking about, August said, his voice dangerously quiet. Don't I? Butch stepped closer. Fire's a terrible thing, isn't it, Edwards? Takes everything so quick. Your wife, your son. August's fist connected with Butch's jaw before he could finish the sentence. The younger Harlow staggered back, blood spurting from his lip, and his companions immediately moved to restrain August. A crowd began to gather as the men struggled. That's enough. Sheriff Taylor's voice cut through the commotion. He pushed through the crowd, hand on his holstered pistol. Break it up now. August shook off the hands holding him, breathing hard. Butch was being helped to his feet by his friends, his expression murderous. He attacked me, Sheriff, Butch spat, touching his bloodied lip. Unprovoked. Like hell it was unprovoked, August countered. I don't care who started it, Taylor interrupted. I'm finishing it. Harlow, take your friends and clear out. Edwards, you come with me. In the sheriff's office, Taylor regarded August with disappointment. Fighting in the street isn't going to help Jim Morrison or that boy. Harlow threatened Daniel, August said, made it clear what they're planning. Taylor sighed. Words aren't threats, Edwards, not legally. He studied August for a long moment. You care about the Morrison place, about the boy, that's plain to see. But getting yourself killed or jailed won't help them. So what would you have me do? August demanded. Stand by while Harlow burns them out. I'd have you be smarter than this, Taylor replied. Gather evidence, get witnesses. Give me something I can use against Harlow legally. He paused. And in the meantime, watch your back. Butch Harlow doesn't take kindly to public humiliation. August left the sheriff's office no more satisfied than when he'd entered. As he headed toward the schoolhouse to collect Daniel, he noticed Delilah standing outside, speaking with a well-dressed man August didn't recognize. The conversation appeared tense, with Delilah's posture rigid and defensive. As August approached, the man tipped his hat to Delilah and walked away, his expression displeased. Delilah turned, surprise registering on her face when she saw August. You're early, she said, smoothing her skirt in a gesture that seemed nervous. School won't be dismissed for another hour. Who was that? August asked, nodding toward the departing man. Walter Reed, Delilah replied. He sits on the school board and he's a close associate of Samuel Harlow, understanding dawned. He was warning you about me, about helping the Morrisons. Delilah didn't deny it. He suggested my position might be reconsidered if I continue to associate with those who oppose Harlow's business interests. Anger flared in August's chest. They're threatening your job now. It's not the first time someone has tried to intimidate me, Mr. Edwards, she said calmly. It won't be the last. This is different, August insisted. Harlow's men burned a cabin today. Next time could be worse. Concern flickered across Delilah's face. Was anyone hurt? No, but that's not the point. August ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is exactly why I told Jim to consider Harlow's offer. People get hurt in these fights, Delilah, people who have nothing to do with it. Like me, you mean? Her eyes flashed. I'm capable of making my own decisions about what risks are worth taking, Mr. Edwards. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you're so quick to surrender when the fight gets difficult. Her words stung all the more for their accuracy. Before August could respond, the school bell rang, signaling the end of lessons. Children began pouring out of the building, Daniel among them. We're not finished with this conversation, August said quietly. No, Delilah agreed. I don't believe we are. The ride back to the Morrison ranch was subdued. Daniel, sensing the tension, asked few questions, and August was grateful for the reprieve. His mind was occupied with Delilah's accusation that he was too quick to surrender. Was that true? Had he been running not just from attachment, but from any fight that seemed unwinnable? When they arrived at the ranch, August was surprised to find several horses he didn't recognize tied at the hitching post. Inside, they found Jim seated at the kitchen table with 3 men neighboring ranchers whose small spreads bordered Morrison land. August, Jim greeted him, and Daniel. Good timing, we're having an important discussion. Daniel looked between the men uncertainly. Should I go to my room, Grandpa? No, son, Jim said, patting the chair beside him. This concerns you too, it's about our future. As Daniel took his seat, Jim introduced the visitors Thomas Beck, Frank Wilson, and Henry Cooper, all small ranchers who, like Morrison, had resisted selling to Harlow over the years. I was just telling them about the cabin, Jim continued. Turns out we're not the only ones having trouble with Harlow's men. Beck, a weathered man in his 50s, nodded grimly. Found 2 of my best steers shot dead last week, no reason for it except meanness. And my west pasture fence was cut, Wilson added. Lost 20 head before we rounded them up. August leaned against the doorframe, taking in this new information. Sheriff won't do anything without proof. That's why we're here, Cooper said. Time to start watching out for each other. Taking turns riding patrol, keeping an eye on each other's property. Safety in numbers, Jim agreed, looking at August. What do you think? It was a strategy August hadn't considered, the smaller ranchers banding together against Harlow. It might work, at least as a temporary measure. but it also meant committing to the fight to the people around this table. Could help, August acknowledged, but Harlow has more men, more resources. More isn't always better, Jim countered. We know this land better than his hired guns, and we're fighting for our homes, not a paycheck. The conversation continued as the ranchers worked out a schedule for patrols and mutual aid. August contributed when asked, but remained uncertain. These men were talking about a prolonged standoff with the most powerful man in the county. The risks were enormous. After the visitors left, Jim sent Daniel upstairs to wash up for dinner. Once the boy was out of earshot, the older man turned to August. "You're still thinking of leaving," Jim said. It wasn't a question, August sighed. "I'm thinking of what's best for Daniel, for you. Fighting Harlow could cost you everything." "Not fighting him definitely will," Jim replied. He moved to the window, gazing out at the land he loved. "My son died believing his boy would inherit this ranch someday. I made him a promise, August. I intend to keep it, even if it gets you killed." August challenged. "What good is a ranch to Daniel if he loses you too?" Jim turned, his eyes sharp despite his failing health. "We all die, Edwards. Question is what we're willing to die for." He studied August for a long moment. "Delilah Patterson came by while you were in town. Said something that stuck with me." August tensed. "What was that?" Said she's never met a man so afraid of caring about something he might lose, Jim replied. "Said it was a shame because you had so much to offer if you'd just stop running." The words hit their mark. August couldn't deny the truth in them, but acknowledging it meant confronting the guilt and grief he'd carried since Colorado. "I'll stay through this trouble with Harlow," August finally said. "Help you protect the ranch, but I'm not promising anything beyond that." Jim nodded, seeming to understand this was as much commitment as August could offer for now. "Fair enough. We'll start with that." The next few weeks saw increased tension across the county. The coalition of small ranchers implemented their patrol system with 2 men riding boundaries each night. August took his turns, often paired with Frank Wilson, a quiet man who asked few questions but kept a sharp eye out for trouble. Harlow's response to this new unity was to increase pressure through legal channels. The bank suddenly called in loans for 2 of the smaller ranchers. The mercantile in Buffalo began refusing credit to families associated with the coalition. Sheriff Taylor, caught between duty and Harlow's influence, managed to do little more than document complaints. Through it all, Daniel watched with the solemn understanding of a child who has already seen too much hardship. He asked fewer questions about when things would get better, instead throwing himself into helping around the ranch feeding chickens, carrying water, even learning to ride fence with August when Jim's health permitted. One evening, as August was teaching Daniel how to properly groom a horse, the boy asked quietly, "Are you going to leave us, Mr. Edwards? When all this trouble is over?" August's hands stilled on the brush he was demonstrating. "Why would you ask that?" Daniel kept his eyes on the horse's flank. "I heard Grandpa talking to Miss Patterson. He said you might not stay, even if we beat Mr. Harlow." Something twisted in August's chest at the resignation in the boy's voice. "Daniel, it's okay," Daniel interrupted, his small voice steady. "Ma and Pa left too, and Grandpa says he'll have to someday. I understand." The simple acceptance in those words from a child who had already lost so much struck August more powerfully than any accusation could have. He set down the brush and knelt to meet Daniel's eyes. "Your parents didn't choose to leave you," he said firmly. "They loved you very much, and your grandfather is fighting with everything he has to stay with you as long as possible." Daniel nodded. "I know, but people still go away." His eyes, too wise for his years, met August's. "If you have to go too, I won't be mad, but I wish you wouldn't." Before August could respond, a rider came galloping into the yard, Thomas Beck, who wasn't scheduled for patrol until the following night. August stepped out of the barn, Daniel following close behind. "Beck, what's happened?" The rancher dismounted, his face grim. "Cooper's barn was burned to the ground last night, his entire hay supply for winter gone, and this was nailed to what was left of the door." He handed August a piece of paper. It was a crude note. "Morrison next, sell or burn." August's blood ran cold. He quickly positioned himself to block Daniel's view of the note. "Go inside, Daniel. Find your grandfather." But now, Daniel, August said firmly. The boy reluctantly obeyed, glancing back with concern as he headed toward the house. Once Daniel was out of earshot, August turned back to Beck. Anyone hurt at Cooper's place? Beck shook his head. By God's grace, no, but Henry's ruined if he can't replace that hay before winter and this threat against Morrison. He trailed off, the implication clear. August folded the note and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'll tell Jim. We'll increase patrols around the house and barn. There's more, Beck said hesitantly. Word in town is that Harlow's bringing in more men from Cheyenne, professionals, gunmen, not cowboys. This news was even more alarming than the fire. If Harlow was importing hired guns, the situation was escalating beyond what their small coalition could handle. When are they due to arrive? August asked. End of the week, from what I heard. Beck remounted his horse. I'm warning the others, we need to be ready. After Beck rode off, August headed to the house, his mind racing. Jim was in his study, a Bible open on his lap, though August suspected he hadn't been reading it. Trouble? Jim asked, seeing August's expression. August handed him the note and relayed Beck's information about the gunmen. Jim read the threat silently, his weathered face betraying little emotion. Not unexpected, he said finally. Harlow's getting desperate as his deadline approaches. Jim, we need to consider getting Daniel out of here, August said. Send him to town, maybe. Stay with Delilah until this blows over. Jim shook his head. Nowhere in Buffalo would be safe if Harlow's truly set on using force, and I won't separate from my grandson, not now. Then what do you suggest? August demanded. We're outnumbered and outgunned, especially with these new men coming in. Jim closed his Bible and set it aside, his movements deliberate. There's something I haven't told you, Edwards, something I've been working on while you and the others have been patrolling. He pulled a document from his desk drawer and handed it to August. It was a legal petition, addressed to the territorial governor, detailing Harlow's intimidation tactics and illegal activities. It was signed by Jim, Beck, Wilson, Cooper, and several townspeople August recognized as business owners from Buffalo. Sheriff Taylor may be in Harlow's pocket, but the governor isn't, Jim explained. I've been gathering statements, evidence. This petition requests an official investigation into Harlow's activities. August skimmed the document, impressed despite his skepticism. Even if the governor acts, it could take weeks for anything to happen. Harlow's moving now, I know, Jim acknowledged. That's why Delilah left for Cheyenne this morning with the petition. Her father has connections with the governor's office. She believes she can expedite the process. August stared at Jim in disbelief. Delilah went to Cheyenne, alone, with evidence against Harlow. The danger this placed her in was enormous. Why didn't you tell me? Because she asked me not to, Jim said simply. She knew you'd try to stop her. Damn right I would have, August muttered. Harlow finds out what she's doing, she could be in serious danger. Delilah Patterson is braver than you give her credit for, Jim replied. And smarter. She left before dawn, took the stage under a different name. No one knows where she's gone except you and me. August paced the small study, torn between admiration for Delilah's courage and fear for her safety. How long until she reaches the governor? 2 days to Cheyenne, perhaps another day to secure a meeting, Jim estimated. If all goes well, we could see territorial marshals here by the end of next week. And if all doesn't go well, August challenged. If Harlow's men arrive first and make good on this threat, he tapped the note still in Jim's hand. Jim's expression hardened. Then we fight, Edwards. We protect what's ours. I'd have thought a man who lost everything once would understand that some things are worth fighting for, even against bad odds. The words struck August like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his young face serious. Grandpa, Mr. Edwards. There's riders coming, lots of them. Both men moved quickly to the window. In the distance, a group of at least 10 horsemen was approaching the ranch. They were still too far away to identify, but they were coming fast and direct. Get your rifle, August told Jim. And keep Daniel away from the windows. Jim nodded grimly. Daniel, come here, son. As Jim moved Daniel to the back of the house, August retrieved his own Winchester from where it hung near the door. He stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but not raised, and waited as the riders approached. To his surprise, he recognized Frank Wilson in the lead, along with the other coalition ranchers and several men August didn't know townspeople from Buffalo from their dress. They reined in their horses in the yard, and Wilson dismounted. "Edwards," he greeted, his usually somber face animated. "Is Jim here, inside?" August replied cautiously. "What's all this? Reinforcements," Wilson said. "Word came that Harlow's making his move tonight, planning to burn you out, run off the stock." Jim appeared on the porch behind August. "How'd you hear this, Frank?" "Bartender at the Buffalo Saloon," Wilson explained. "Overheard Harlow's foreman talking. Man was in his cups, said too much." He gestured to the riders behind him. "Not just us ranchers anymore, Jim. Folks in town are sick of Harlow throwing his weight around, decided it was time to take a stand." August surveyed the group's shopkeepers, a blacksmith, ordinary men who'd likely never been in a gunfight. "This isn't your fight," he told them. "Harlow's bringing in professional gunmen." One of the townsmen, whom August recognized as the owner of the Buffalo Mercantile, spoke up. "It became our fight when Harlow started threatening to ruin anyone who did business with Morrison or his friends. Man thinks he owns the whole county." Jim stepped forward. "We appreciate the support, but Edwards is right. This could get dangerous." "Already is dangerous," Beck said from horseback. "Cooper's barn was just the beginning. Either we stand together now or we all fall one by one." August couldn't argue with the logic, though he worried these men didn't fully understand what they were volunteering for. Still, their presence changed the calculus. With this many defenders, Harlow's men might think twice before attacking. "How many men does Harlow have?" August asked Wilson. "Regular hands, about 15, Wilson replied. "Plus these new gunmen 5 or 6 from what we heard." August nodded, his mind already working through defensive positions, shifts for keeping watch. "All right then. If you're staying, we need to get organized. First priority is protecting the house and barn." As the group dismounted and gathered closer, August began assigning positions and responsibilities. These weren't trained fighters, but they were determined men defending their community. It would have to be enough. By sunset, the Morrison ranch was as fortified as they could make it. Men were positioned in the barn, the bunkhouse, and the main house, with clear fields of fire covering all approaches. Daniel had been settled in the root cellar with blankets, books, and strict instructions to stay put until someone came for him. August found Jim in his study, loading a shotgun with hands that trembled slightly from illness but not from fear. "Everything's set," August reported. "If Harlow's men come, they'll get a warm welcome." Jim nodded, setting the shotgun aside. "Never thought it would come to this." "Fighting our neighbors." "Harlow's no neighbor," August said. "Not in any way that matters." Jim studied August with keen eyes. "You've changed your tune, Edwards. Week ago, you were advising me to sell out." August couldn't deny it. "Week ago, I was thinking like a drifter." Man who doesn't put down roots doesn't understand what's worth fighting for. And now, August moved to the window, gazing out at the land that had somehow become important to him. "Now I'm thinking like a man who's tired of running. Tired of letting men like Harlow take what isn't theirs." Jim smiled faintly. "Delilah was right about you." Before August could ask what he meant, a shout came from outside. One of the lookouts had spotted riders approaching from the north. August grabbed his rifle and headed for the porch, Jim following more slowly. In the growing darkness, they could make out a group of horsemen moving toward the ranch, perhaps 15 in total. They made no attempt at stealth, riding openly across the open ground. "That's not Harlow's style," Jim murmured. "Man prefers to strike from the shadows," August agreed. Something wasn't right. As the riders drew closer, a familiar figure became visible at their head, Sheriff Taylor, his badge catching the last light of day. "Hold your fire," August called to the defenders. "It's the sheriff." The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, and Taylor rode forward alone, hands clearly visible. August stepped off the porch to meet him, rifle lowered but ready. "Evening, Edwards," Taylor greeted, his expression unreadable. "Quite a gathering you've got here." "Just some friends visiting," August replied evenly. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Taylor dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Got some news you and Morrison should hear." He glanced at the armed men visible around the property. "Preferably somewhere private." August hesitated, then nodded toward the house. Jim's inside. In Jim's study, the sheriff removed his hat and stood awkwardly, refusing the seat Jim offered. "I'll get right to it. Samuel Harlow and his son Butch were arrested 2 hours ago by territorial marshals." August and Jim exchanged stunned looks. "Marshals," Jim repeated. "From where?" "Cheyenne," Taylor confirmed. "Arrived this afternoon with warrants for fraud, intimidation, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges." He shifted uncomfortably. "Seems someone provided the governor with quite a file of evidence against the Harlows, enough that he dispatched marshals immediately." "Delilah," August breathed. "She had succeeded and faster than anyone could have expected," Taylor nodded. "Miss Patterson returned on the afternoon stage, marshals with her, came straight to my office with the warrants." His expression turned rueful. "Gave me quite a dressing down about doing my job, too." "And you just arrested Harlow?" Jim asked skeptically. "After all this time looking the other way?" Taylor flushed. "I'm still the law in Buffalo, Morrison, and when presented with legal warrants from the territorial authority." He straightened. "Besides, I never much liked Harlow. Man just had too much influence to cross without cause." August wasn't entirely convinced by the sheriff's sudden change of heart, but the result was what mattered. "What about Harlow's men? The ones he brought in from Cheyenne?" "Gone," Taylor said. "Cleared out as soon as the marshals showed up. Hired guns know when a job's turned sour." He gestured to the men he'd brought with him. "These are deputies I swore in to help keep order. Thought Harlow's regular hands might try something desperate." Jim leaned back in his chair, the relief evident on his tired face. "So it's over." "The immediate danger, yes," Taylor confirmed. "Harlow and his son are being transported to Cheyenne tomorrow to await trial, his foreman and a few others too." He replaced his hat. "You folks can stand down now. No need for an armed camp." After the sheriff left, August and Jim shared the news with the defenders. The mood quickly turned from tense readiness to celebration. Someone produced bottles of whiskey, and toasts were raised to Jim's stubbornness, to the coalition's bravery, and most of all, to Delilah Patterson's courage and quick action. As the impromptu celebration continued, August slipped away to the root cellar to retrieve Daniel. The boy had fallen asleep among his blankets, a book of adventure stories open beside him. August gently shook him awake. "Daniel, it's over, you can come up now." The boy blinked sleepily. "Did the bad men come? Was there a fight?" "No fight," August assured him, helping him gather his blankets. "Everything's okay now, better than okay." Upstairs, Daniel was swept into his grandfather's arms as Jim explained in simple terms what had happened. The boy's face lit up at the mention of Delilah's role. "Miss Patterson saved the ranch?" he asked, wide-eyed. "She sure did," Jim confirmed. "That's one special lady." August couldn't have agreed more, though his thoughts on Delilah Patterson went far beyond admiration for her bravery. As the celebration wound down and the visitors departed, promising to return the next day to help with repairs to Cooper's property, August found himself drawn to the porch, gazing toward town. Jim joined him there, Daniel asleep in his arms. "Go," he said simply. August turned. "What?" "Go to town," Jim clarified. "Thank her properly." A knowing smile crossed his weathered face. "And maybe tell her what you've been afraid to say." August hesitated. "It's late." "And after everything that's happened, son," Jim interrupted gently, "if there's one thing my illness has taught me, it's not to waste time when it comes to matters of the heart." He adjusted Daniel in his arms. "I'll put this young man to bed. You saddle up and go find that schoolteacher." 20 minutes later, August was riding toward Buffalo, his thoughts racing faster than his horse. What exactly did he plan to say to Delilah? That she'd been right about him, that her courage had shamed his caution. That somewhere between arguments about the ranch and quiet conversations on the porch, he'd fallen in love with her. All of the above, he supposed. Buffalo was unusually active for late evening, the news of Harlow's arrest having energized the small town. As August rode down Main Street, several people called out greetings, their attitudes noticeably warmer than in previous weeks. The schoolhouse was dark, so August headed for the small boarding house where Delilah rented rooms. The landlady, Mrs. Perkins, answered his knock with raised eyebrows. Mr. Edwards, it's rather late for social calls. Yes, madam, August acknowledged, removing his hat. I apologize for the hour, but I need to speak with Miss Patterson. It's important. Mrs. Perkins studied him for a moment, then nodded. Wait in the parlor. I'll see if she's receiving visitors. The parlor was small and fussy, filled with doilies and porcelain figurines that made August acutely aware of his size and the trailed dust on his clothes. He stood awkwardly, hat in hand, until he heard footsteps in the hallway. Delilah appeared in the doorway, dressed in a simple blue wrapper, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but pleased to see him. August, she said, using his given name for the first time. Mrs. Perkins said it was urgent. It is, he replied, suddenly finding it difficult to form the words he'd rehearsed on the ride to town. We heard what you did, the Marshal's Harlow's arrest. A small smile curved her lips. News travels fast. Sheriff Taylor brought it himself, August explained. Along with deputies to protect the ranch, though it turns out we didn't need them. He took a step closer. What you did was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. Delilah's smile widened. The best actions are often both, in my experience. You could have been hurt, August said, his voice lower, if Harlow had discovered what you were doing, but he didn't, she interrupted gently. And now he can't hurt anyone else. She studied his face. That's not really why you came here tonight, though, is it? August took a deep breath. No, I came because you were right about me, about why I was so quick to suggest giving up. He moved closer still, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I've been running for 3 years, not just from place to place, but from feeling anything that might hurt if I lost it. Delilah's expression softened. And now I'm tired of running, August said simply. Jim asked me to stay on as foreman, to help him run the ranch for Daniel until the boy's old enough to take over himself. And your answer, I told him yes, August replied. But there's something else I need to know first. He hesitated, then took her hand. If I stay in Buffalo, is there any chance you might consider that is, would you allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean. Delilah's smile was radiant as she squeezed his hand. Mr. Edwards, I've been waiting months for you to ask that question. Relief and joy washed through him. I'm not an easy man, Delilah. I've got scars that may never fully heal. All the most worthwhile people do, she replied softly. She reached up to touch his cheek. They called you hopeless, she said, echoing words from one of their earlier conversations. But I knew better. August smiled, covering her hand with his own. Guess they never saw me fight for something that mattered. 2 years later, August stood on the porch of the Morrison ranch house, his house now, since Jim had passed peacefully 6 months earlier. The old man had lived long enough to see August and Delilah married, to dance at their wedding despite his failing health, and to know that his grandson would be raised by people who loved him as their own. Daniel, now 10, was helping Delilah in the garden, carefully watering the vegetables while their 6-month-old daughter, Sarah, watched from a blanket in the shade. August had named her after his first wife, with Delilah's blessing not as a replacement, but as a reminder that love could grow again even after the deepest loss. The Morrison Ranch was thriving. With Samuel Harlow serving time in the territorial prison, his empire had been divided and sold. August had purchased one adjacent parcel, expanding the ranch to secure its future for Daniel. The coalition of small ranchers had evolved into a formal association that protected all their interests against larger operators moving into the territory. As for Buffalo itself, the town was growing. Wyoming had achieved statehood the previous year, and with the new railroad spur being built just 10 miles away, the future looked promising. Delilah still taught at the school, though she'd taken a brief respite after Sarah's birth. She'd recently been elected to the town council, as well the first woman to hold such a position in the county. August watched his family in the garden, a contentment he'd once thought impossible settling deep in his soul. He still carried the memories of his first family, the pain of their loss a part of him that would never fully disappear. But alongside that pain now lived joy, purpose, and love. Daniel looked up from his watering, caught August's eye, and waved enthusiastically. Pa. Come see how big the tomatoes are getting. It still startled August sometimes, hearing Daniel call him Pa. It had started gradually, about a year after August and Delilah married, and with Jim's quiet encouragement. The first time had nearly brought August to tears. "Coming, son," he called back, stepping off the porch. As he crossed the yard toward his family, August thought about the winding path that had brought him here, the losses, the wandering, the reluctance to fight for anything permanent. How different his life would have been if he'd continued running, if he hadn't stayed to help Jim Morrison protect his land, if he hadn't opened his heart to Delilah's challenge and Daniel's need. Delilah looked up as he approached, her smile warming him more than the summer sun. She knew him better than anyone, his strengths and weaknesses, his fears and hopes, and she loved him anyway. "What are you thinking about?" she asked as he knelt beside her, reaching out to touch Sarah's soft cheek. August looked around at his family, at the ranch that had become his home, at the life he'd once been too afraid to fight for. "I'm thinking that some battles are worth every scar," he answered. "And I'm thinking how grateful I am that you saw something in me worth believing in." Delilah leaned forward and kissed him gently. "I always knew you were a man worth fighting for, August Edwards, even when you didn't." Daniel made a face at their display of affection, and Sarah gurgled happily on her blanket. And August Edwards, once a drifter too wounded to stay anywhere for long, embraced the family and the future he'd finally found the courage to claim.